Everyone to the public hearing and public meeting for the planning commission. The date is May 13th and the time is 5:32 p.m. We will start with our pledge of allegiance. To Lewis and Yon.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Item B. Does anyone have a conflict of interest or any ex parte contacts on any item on tonight's agenda? We'll start with you, Kent. No? Is that enough?
No.
No.
And I'll probably abstain on the way to work. There on the side of caution.
Cameron?
No conflicts. I did speak with Tom Lacrosse, cost about the, 2,000.
2,000 bucks.
Yeah.
All right, thank you. Did everyone have a chance to review the minutes from April 8th and April 16th? I did, I made my changes. Does anyone need more time to do that? Yeah, no?
And I was only here for one, but
Did you review the one you were here at?
yes.
Cameron, were you able to review those?
Yeah, no concerns.
Okay, so I would take a motion to approve the minutes.
So moved.
Second,
Okay, so Cameron, motion, and Larry seconded, all in favor?
Aye.
aye.
Thank you. And now it is time for open forum. There's a limit of 3 minutes per speaker. You may talk about anything not on the agenda. And please state your name for our records. Thank you.
My name is Tom Lacoste, and just a simple thing, I've had the advantage of sitting in here when the master plan was being discussed with the survey. I would like to request, if possible, that would be made available to the public as soon as possible. And there's really a lot of good stuff in that survey, and I know you've been using it. And I had the benefit of listening to Kevin, because I was next on the agenda, so I heard firsthand all the good stuff that's in that. And my only request and comment, I hope it's less than 3 minutes, is that that survey could be made available to the public.
And that is already planned. It was rolled out last Saturday, actually. We were doing. Thank you. Any others? All right, commissioner comments. We'll start at the other end of the table. Cameron, do you have any comments you would like to make at this time?
No.
Larry?
No.
And mine is, it was a lovely event last Saturday. We were able to have a table and a half, I guess, to show the results of the general survey to all those in attendance. And we will be making them public via the website with notices being mailed on how to access them. Hopefully by the end of the month, that's my goal, end of the month. All I need to do is get the.
I thought it was a good event too. I think that it's really nice that our community gets together on occasions like this and gets to know one another. Sit in the shade and listen to some music, meet new people, and thank you for doing that table and those efforts to have the graphs and comment area and stuff like that. That was really good.
It was kind of, I
Did
saw,
you have a lot of people questioning?
we had a handful, but we'll do it again. You know, I'm actually, you know, I want to think of a few ways where we can make it, even more available. And, we'll keep working on that. It's very, very interesting. So that's that. Now I will take the motion, before we do anything else, last week, Riker will not be here, tonight, and he has discussed with me. And I wanted to run it by the commission, once our general plan is off our plate, if we would prefer him to come to our work meetings where we really discuss and talk about and,
Yes.
and integrate the input from our public hearings.
Yes.
And, does anyone have an objection to that? No. Karen?
No.
No. So I'll communicate that to him and we'll be moving this things, that, I think that time day / works better. And it's just a better use of his talent and time. Okay? And, overview of the items up for public hearing. We have 4 items for public hearing tonight. And I, have been asked by multiple people, it was suggested we do an overview of the items up for public hearing. To potentially allay any questions or fears or concerns. Or maybe generate a question or two. So the first, item A is an amended ordinance adopting the village overlay law zone. This one is, an ordinance that will come up for multiple public hearings. And it will be noted in the title, which round it is. We started doing that, I think, tonight as well. And this would, as it stands, it would place 100-foot buffer on commercial zones wherever they abut residential zones in which owners may have their choice of a number of uses that are less intense, as well as the option to make smaller lots than commercial or higher resorts zones allow. So smaller businesses. Overlay zone is intended to designate areas for lower traffic, types of commercial activities between other commercial areas and residential areas, and to meet the needs of neighborhood residents and reduce conflicts between higher impact commercial uses and residential neighborhoods. Benefits of this zone could include the ability to build small 2-family homes and many other community serving uses, and to divide land into smaller lots, since the minimum lot size is 20,000 square feet instead of a full acre. This is the first of at least 2 hearings on this ordinance, and when the final hearing is scheduled, any commercial owner who would be affected by this ordinance will be notified of that hearing of the final ordinance that we will be voting on, okay? The second ordinance tonight is to amend Title 16 of the Virgin Municipal Code to rename it limited commercial habitation to live work. This is the second time this ordinance has gone through, to add and amend definitions accordingly and to expand availability of the use and to amend associated standards. And it would replace the limited commercial habitation with a new version of a similar use called 16.26 live work units. Add the definitions of living quarters, dwelling unit, live work unit. It would make these uses only in commercial and higher resort zones. Primary purpose is to encourage small startup businesses by allowing business owners to provide small living quarters for themselves or their employees upon the same property with their business. And then, the third one up is one, and this was, I don't know how this happened, but there was a slight amendment to this, low impact conditional use permit ordinance, but it wasn't in the one that was posted. The one that was posted is exactly the same one that was posted last time. But if anybody has any comments they would like to add from the public on that, would be more than willing to listen. And just to refresh your memory, this ordinance makes a number of changes to chapter 16 of which is our conditional use procedure, including the addition of low impact conditional use, and it kind of streamlines the process, so it's less burdensome, but allows for some standards to be put in place. It allows the town greater enforcement options over uses that require compliance with specific standards. And they attach to the land and therefore are a permanent record of those standards that will continue through changes of ownership. Their more permitted uses are more difficult to hold to town standards, and compliance with standards or changes in use may not survive changes in ownership. That's the thinking behind this. However, when specific standards for a given use are sufficiently covered, many lower impact uses can safely be listed as permitted. So it's like a step in between as we get those standards put in place. This ordinance, if adopted as is, will make all commercial uses conditional as they once were. And so this may be controversial, so please consider the following. Low impact conditional use permit makes the process extremely simple for many applications. Any of these conditional use may be listed as permitted once the town has adopted standards specific to that use. And since the grant of conditional use is an administrative decision, public input may not even be a factor in that limited impact decision. The planning commission may not deny an application unless some aspect, such as location, makes compliance with town standards impossible, which isn't a very likely circumstance. Finally, chapter 8, excuse me. There are several changes to the supplementary and qualifying regulation, including add standards governing two-family dwellings, which is a use listed in pending village overlay. It prohibits the use of roofs as floor space in commercial zones wherever they may provide visibility to or from residential property, and reduces the exceptions allowed for additional building height and limits them to 30 inches. It clarifies what is meant by 1 ERU per acre by replacing that phrase with a limit to actual containment output, so that an applicant who wishes to use a high-tech septic system may be allowed greater density. It adds a section currently only found in the subdivision chapter describing which lands are not suitable for building, and it lowers the maximum allowable height of accessory buildings from 20 to 18 feet. A lot of little changes in that one. With that overview, I will take the motion to close the public meeting.
So the public speak on it? No.
No, we gotta, now, that's just the overview, now we're gonna close the public meeting and open the public hearing, and that's what I'm taking the motion for.
I see.
Would someone like to make a motion?
I move we close the public meeting and open the public hearing. Second.
Thank you, all in favor?
Aye.
All right. So now, on our agenda, we are on item A, items for comment. Is there any, and I just wanna double, triple check, with staff that there are no, email or letter communications that we need to have? No, okay. And this is an ordinance amending Virgin Municipal Code Title 16 by adding chapter 48 Village Overlay Zone. Does anyone have any comments on that? Please come up and please remember to state your name.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Tom Lacoste, excuse me. And I was at the meeting 2 weeks ago when this was introduced. And I was on the agenda next, I didn't quite understand. There was a very dynamic conversation going on. And so I went home and I Googled overlay zones. To see just what the story is on those. And I got some really interesting information. I learned a fair amount about overlay zones. And first thing I did was I got Washington County, and the village overlay zones. What popped up was Washington County's chapter 27 for overlay zones. You mentioned buffer earlier, but we'll get to that. But at the very top of their ordinance, the very first thing they say is, the purpose of an overlay zone is to apply certain additional requirements that are superimposed upon a base zoning district. In the instance of conflicting requirements, the stricter of the conflicting requirements shall apply. Right up front, so everybody knows what we're talking about. So then, I talked to somebody at Pine Valley. They spent a year and a half getting their village overlay zone done. And the process they went through was quite impressive. They actually had surveys that went out to people, studies, a committee was formed. They sent out postcards to people, and there was a whole lot of input as to how do we do, what's the right way to do this? And, it took them about a year and a half, but there was I'm talking now a process to get an overlay approved based on what's involved. Their effort was to preserve certain areas. The next one was Harmony, New Harmony got one, and theirs only took about a year. This one took a year and a half, a year. That's working through the county, whatever. So then it occurred to me that we're a municipality, so we're not a village, even though it's called village ordinance. So I looked at the, the ordinances for St. George. And it was very interesting that they have overlay ordinances, and just the titles of the ordinance tells what an ordinance is for. It's basically to preserve something. Period, okay? And you can tell by the titles, I think titles are important, I'll get that a little later. Some of these ordinances in terms of the title, but the title really means a lot. You know what the ordinance is? Let me give these to you, so I don't have to, you can look at the highlighted part. As I go through the second page, actually.
Thank
But,
you.
you're welcome. But I'm gonna highlight the other one. There we go. And this is but these are the ones for municipalities, in St. George. And I found it very interesting, just by reading the titles of what the intent of an overlay zone is. They have 13A, hillside development overlay. Everybody knows what's going up and down Bluff Street, looks like or something, so protecting hillsides from nasty things happening with builders. Okay, the next one I highlighted is 13B, is there other one? The development of geological hazard or adverse construction condition overlay zone, it's pretty self-explanatory. Next one is development, flood and erosion hazard overlay zones, again, that's the purpose of the overlay. Resort overlay, and the last one I really like, really straightforward. St. George Arts District Overlay Zone, landmark sites and historic preservation commission. Again, the word preservation, and this is what the woman told me at Pine Valley too. That they, the first thing they did is say, what do we want to preserve? What are our goals? Okay, so the overlay process is pretty straightforward and pretty, I think important. I think overlays are really important, but for the right purpose, and there's a reason for them. I'm not sure that this purpose, which was already mentioned, the purpose for this one is simply to have a buffer zone for anybody who owns commercial land and has residential land next to it, to have a buffer zone for that. That can be handled easily. I'll get to that later, okay? But that's what was brought up. I was glad you brought up the word buffer zone, because I was gonna highlight that in there. And I wish Lee was here, because she said, that's it, buffer zone from, if you got residential, whatever. And I went through this with somebody else. They looked at all the commercial property and overlays would not apply. Okay, so anyway, that's it. Now to the ordinance itself. Can I speak to that? Okay, good. Well, I'll get to the end before I think how it should be retitled, okay? But right now on line 15 of the ordinance, it says, refers to the word buffer zone. That's a key thing. Nothing to do with preservation or anything like that. Chapter 48 reserve. What I would like to, it basically talks about the location, the 100-foot setback is what it's talking about, if I'm not mistaken. So anybody has residential, this imposes a 100-foot setback. That literally puts me out of the place. Because it goes to the BLM. I'm not talking about myself, I'm talking about affordable housing. 100-foot buffer zone. The thing that I would really like to see on this ordinance, which I really loved when we did the first one, March 11th, on the duplex plan, it had before and after. It's really clear. You say, okay, here's the ordinance. What's it like before and what's after? So you can see very specifically what's going on. And on this one, on line 48.06, this is the new section, by the way, there's no such thing as 48, so 48.06. And I would like it to say permitted uses before, permitted uses. We're talking about getting rid of permitted uses in commercial, all of them except a couple of three. I'll get to that in a minute, okay? Because the other thing I mentioned, didn't mention, is they're all cross-referenced, so you'll see me about 3 or 4 times here, because they do, all speak to one another. So, and I won't be redundant, I promise. Anyway, I would like to see on line 87, it says before, and show what the befores are in terms of permitted uses. And then, after, on line 88 and 89, show where it is. That would be after. So in other words, line 88, above line 88 would be the word after, period. One thing that really concerns people is that what this says is that unlisted uses are deemed prohibited. That's a real eye opener. I mean, I went to the town council for one reason, it was not listed. And I think Vince mentioned that the other day too, in the meeting, it's either listed or it's not listed. And so the reason I got on here was because it was neither listed or listed, so let's put it let's make it listed. But to say, if it's unlisted, then I would have had to go up to the town, when I went up to them, if this were in place. And I said, I want to do a duplex in commercial, they would have said, sorry, duplexes are not listed. They're prohibited. They're not listed on commercial, conditional, or permitted. They're not listed, therefore they're prohibited. I've been saying that too many times, but I have to make that point. That's an eye opener. And, there's some reaction to that one. On the actual, permitted uses on this one, if you look at line 87, there's basically there are, of all permitted uses that are now permitted in commercial, of all of them, the only ones that are permitted are line 91, administrative and professional offices, and 93, art galleries. What I also found interesting is that there are others that are added to this one, to this by whoever wrote the ordinance. And for example, these are permitted uses, but they've never been discussed or approved by anybody through a formal process as permitted. Okay, shuttle stop, small grocery, small retail, and banks without drive-in services. Those are not permitted uses unless I'm looking at an old one, but they're added to here as permitted uses, which I find a little ironic, okay? Then conditional uses, you for that real quick. Line 105, which is kind of interesting, 2-family dwellings in compliance with VCM 16807. This section is pending and shall not apply, or should not be applicable until the standards for limited 2-family dwellings are enforced. And I'll get to that. That's a reference to another ordinance that you have here, okay? But it's kind of interesting that how it's highlighted. And there's another word that's in here, which is really interesting too. It's called limited 2-family homes now, not just 2-family homes. You'll see that in other ordinance too. Some little words, but they mean a lot, okay? On line 125, so any use not listed again is prohibited, such as, for example, which I'm not sure why you would say such as, for example, and then it lists a whole bunch of items that are basically prohibited uses, and that's fine, not a problem at all. But I think there are 4 that are added to this one, they're highlighted, that are added prohibited uses by the author of this ordinance, okay? And for what it's worth, it's just a point. Mini golf, roller rink, arcade, and bowling alleys are highlighted at the bottom as being added somewhat arbitrarily, I think. I wish Lee was here, I really do. But anyway, I hope she's watching. I know I'm not taking up somebody else's place, and I'm trying to hurry, I promise. But it's really important stuff that's going on, and a lot is happening on these agendas, I tell you. I would recommend, I think there's a lot of separate titles, and the last one that we're gonna talk about is probably the most creative non-title I've seen. Okay, it's a duplicate of the March 11th one, but I'll get to that one. I would like to see the heading on this one say something like an ordinance amending Virgin Municipal Title Code by 16 and adding chapter 48 Village Overlay Zone and repealing all but 2 of the permitted uses now allowed in commercial zone section 40.08. I'd like the title to say that. See what I mean, people are not gonna show up. Great, that's the bottom line, that's what it's doing, exactly what it's doing. It's eliminating it's not, it's doing a lot more than creating a buffer zone, it's eliminating all commercial uses except two. That's it for that one. Sorry, I appreciate your time very much, and, I appreciate, Cameron, when I was sitting there and I kept hearing overlays, and I couldn't figure it out, so I went home and Googled it. Now, I hope I'm able to share something with you that you can take with you for what it's worth. Thanks for your time.
Thank you. Are there any other comments on item 1? From the public?
Is that comments from us?
No. In that case, we'll move on to number 2, the second public hearing for an ordinance amending Title 16 of Virgin Municipal Code to rename limited commercial habitation to live work, to add and amend definitions accordingly, to expand the availability of use, and to amend associated standards. Is there anyone who would like to, in the audience, who'd like to make a comment on this?
Again, I said they're interrelated. My name is Tom Lacoste, and, first thing I noticed on this one is this is a great ordinance. It's a great ordinance. It was worked on really hard. And I felt bad that I've been waiting for almost a year. And the date on this one, the first thing on mine is 22 and 23, say 2024 instead of 2025. Larry's a patient guy. And so there's a whole lot actually going on. There are a couple things on this one that I'd like to bring to your attention. One is on line 85, and they're all good, but this one says, no building work unit may exceed 2 stories above grade. Now, in another ordinance that speaks to 2-family dwellings, there at one time, it allowed for a 2-story, 2-family dwelling. But if you look on on item A4, line 114, you'll see that it's only one level. So for consistency purposes, if somebody looks at this and says, what's wrong with a 2-story duplex? In the same way that this one is, I think this is the way it should be, and I think you might want to reconsider allowing 2-story duplexes. They were defined in the first version of the ordinance, and they're pretty popular, I think. If somebody didn't have quite as much space, it was two-story duplex, and that would be consistent with this ordinance. So I'm just looking, just for consistency purposes, I don't see any reason why that wouldn't be the case. There's on line 91, it makes reference to businesses there. It says, unless an exception is allowed under section 16.25D below, and there is no section 16.25D below. Okay, line 110 would be on line 110 on the ordinance. So what I recommend is simply,
What number was that?
it is, you want the line number?
Yes.
Yes, you bet. Take a line number in 91,
I see.
and 91 makes reference to go to line 110. That's where 16.D would be. There's nothing there. And quite frankly, I think it's good. I think you should delete, because I know Keith doesn't like exceptions, but people don't like exceptions, and this is allowing for exceptions. Either you need to write the exceptions before you approve it, or don't make reference to them and delete that one line 95. That's none of my concern. It's just an observation that it makes reference to something that's not there on the ordinance. And that's it. I think it's a great ordinance. Thanks for your time.
You're welcome.
Good catch. Thanks.
You can check them on. We've already see it. Thank you, Mr. McCox. Any other comments on the work? All right. That leads us to number 3, an ordinance providing streamlined process for low impact conditional use permits. adding conditional uses and amending the conditional use approval process. There's nothing really new in this one. There was some change in language as a result of our previous discussions at our last board meeting. But for some reason that one was not posted. So, but I would be more than happy to hear any comments.
I didn't know if this is all for duplicates, already been out there,
Yeah,
then what's happening? Why is it being brought forward again?
because as I just explained, there was a change in language in one section, but when I sent the ordinance to the clerk to be posted, somehow the old one got sent.
Well, this seems to me to be a pretty big one.
Yeah, it's gonna take, it's gonna have, it's
I mean,
gonna
it's
be,
19 pages.
yeah, it's gonna be a while.
But, so if I were to look up the title of this one, I would find this ordinance title as it's written here.
It's amending the chapter 16 conditional use permit. 16.
Again,
So you
the
would,
titles are, you know,
so one
I'm
of,
stupid, and if I see the title, it makes sense, but these are a
so
little
here,
obscure.
so one of the things, where you had a before and after, you can only do that with existing ordinances. And I agree with you, that is a great policy to follow, but in the case of totally new language, there is no before. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm just wondering, I'm trying to remember which one Kent asked about when Lee brought it on the table last, 4 weeks ago. Cause she brought the example up of somebody who's going to build a duplex. And I think he was asking it in the context of this, but it could have been in the context of an overlay, not really sure.
Yeah,
But this one basically echoes what Lee said in terms of line 53. They run with the land. And basically, when she was describing, this ordinance, I think, or something like that, the description I think she gave was, what if you wanted to build a duplex, two-family zone? I defer to Kent, and Kent, I'm not sure if that's the one you were asking about or not, you asked about two of them in that meeting. Pardon me?
I don't,
Okay, but the explanation was basically that Lee gave, which was pretty, this is why we need this. And then it stays with the land, it goes with the land, so changes of ownership, whatever, stay with the land. And we brought this up in mind many times, you don't have to have a conditional use permit. I'm referring to line 53 and 54, you don't have to have that. If you have, and when Lee invited me to speak to that, I spoke to it. What we've done is simply put it in the deed. It is simply a condition in the deed that stays with the deed in perpetuity to my successors and or assigners, or whatever the language they don't use nowadays. That's what it is. She used those terms, but she said the word engraved with it, and it made a lot of sense. Well, this is a good thing, because that way, if a person changes what they're doing, then they can't, it stays with the land. Well, we're covering that in a different, very simple way, stays with the deed, without having all unnecessary CUP restrictions on it, and I think that was kind of I was glad she was able to invite me to answer that, because that's exactly what I told her back, was, that's all you have to do. If you want to, you don't have to have a conditional use permit that has all that. And the other thing that's a concern on this one is line 59, where basically if something is zoned commercial, in a commercial zone, it's approved, it's allowed. So I want to build a deli or a restaurant or something like that, it's an approved one. Well, I might need a little bit of time to get my money together, I might have to sell a house or a lot or something like that to do the financing, things happen. This one has a very mean restriction in it, where it basically says if you haven't done it within a year, it's all null and void. So I encourage somebody to read that, and that basically that's not a very appealing thing for somebody to
What line is
basically, pardon me?
what line was that?
I'm on lines 59, bold print even. Or has not been established with 1 year after the date granted.
That's pretty common CUP.
Pardon me?
That's pretty common CUP language.
Well, so much for CUPs, that's why I like, that, one more argument for keeping the ones that are already, thank you for saying that. Keeping the ones that are already approved commercial uses. Get them away from CUP, keep them that way, because that way, if somebody came in, again, there's a deli there, I wanna buy it, they know what they're getting, and they know what they have to do to get it. Making it a CUP process, who's gonna do something if they don't even know what they can build on the land? If you have an acre of commercial property, and you go in and say, what can I wanna build a deli, well, here, start the CUP process, rather than, it's a done deal, get your money. And follow the procedures that are already set up, the standards now we're talking about, the procedures are already set up by the staff, or by the administration, so, anyway. That's important, so I guess I'm glad I hadn't read the one before, but just again, taking everything and suddenly making it CUP, I will repeat that a few times, because in different contexts. And some of this, I now understand why Cameron was saying some of the things he was saying on the 60th last month. It's like, hello, he didn't say that. Right. So I read this as something new, there's something on lines 47 and 48 that, not really quite sure what that means, but in 1602 and 16.26, when you look at this, I have no idea what those are, but there might be some kind of language in there that might make somebody's eye open. So again, I'm thinking of transparency and openness. You know, you can make references to them. Line 43. Well, here's what should be the heading, lines 42, 43, and 44. All uses listed as permitted in commercial and highway resort zones, except for single-family dwellings, hereby require conditional use permits and shall be listed as conditional. That should be the heading. That would be the heading. Then, anyway, I'm sorry, but it tells it like it is in the title. It doesn't say, this is obscure, sorry, it's creative, let me just put it that way, be quiet. So anyway, the other thing, let me share with you real quickly. Not sure what line 103 means, it's just there's a line there. Except for live work. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me, line 103 in terms of restrictions and that, but that's just a question I have. But,
That was the amendment based on discussion.
Thank you.
Yellow is added language.
Yeah, I printed the first one online, and it looked like it was all redacted. Somebody told me to get a color printer, so. Anyway. True story, I won't tell you who told me that. I met with her, anyway. I said, can I get a clean one from Crystal? She said, get a color printer instead.
I didn't know.
I just shot.
Anything else?
Anyway, I thought I was gonna have lines 406 and from line 406. But again, consistencies from one to the other. Line 406, the number one standard town goal. Encourage addition of long-term rentals and affordable homes. Number one. But you won't read that in the text of the other stuff. You won't. It's like getting farther and farther removed from the initial intent of the town council to allow for duplexes in commercial zone with standards, period. Sorry. And I found number 8 on that to be a little low on the list. Okay, our priority is the last one, to include and utilize citizen opinions and talent in evolving community plans and ordinances. I think that should be a little higher than the last one on the list. But that's just my opinion. There's a lot of good people with a lot of good ideas around here.
So Tom, real quick on that, live work ordinance where it's referred to with D, it's just a typo, it should be C, there was an A that was removed in that from the earlier.
Oh,
motion, so.
Okay. So that's just a simple typo.
Yeah.
Good work.
Yeah, I just went,
That's what I kind of thought it was.
yeah, I just went back to an earlier edition after you recommended that, and I saw that we eliminated A, which was more of a building requirement than a zoning requirement, so we eliminated it and then moved everything up, and then E was like. what?
Good.
Yeah.
Then we can say that, then I can also make a reference to one other typo. The person who typed 2024 instead of 2025.
And I think Crystal usually grabs those and they give it on for a while.
What's that?
Put it back to me.
It's on you. You don't have enough on your plate.
I just got this guy, I just can't.
Oh, right here.
Yeah,
I
line
thought the other one,
91.
23
Oh, you mean for that day?
and 22. And then, if you. It comes with one thing and then.
Maybe catch those dates when we pass them for planning and zoning,
Yeah,
or town council.
yeah, we tried to catch them. I also saw in one, there was a misname of a council member as well as in there.
Yeah, when it goes through town council, we usually fix them and
Yeah,
touch the dates and the, town council members are usually all fixed at the end.
all right, well, thank you, Mr. Lopez. And our final item for public hearing tonight is an ordinance updating, clarifying and amending various sections of the municipal code, Title 16, Chapter 8, supplementary and qualifying regulations. Is there anyone who has any thoughts about that?
So what item was it, A3 or A4?
Yes.
I'd rather be home. I appreciate you guys doing this too. One thing I did read through these, that came up, where I could take a jab at Crystal, because one of the themes I saw through all of these were planning and zoning, planning and zoning, planning and zoning. You people are very valuable, but you're limited in your time. And it basically, when I kept reading these, planning and zoning is doing this, planning and zoning is doing, those are administrative things, you have staff to do that. But it's a common thread through these, if you're, as you read them, that planning and zoning must review and approve. And a lot of the times I found that you could put something in there that basically says, let staff do it, it's a staff administrative thing. You guys make laws, propose laws and ordinances, and a lot of this is time consuming for two things, time consuming for you guys, but also the person who is trying to get a conditional use permit, it's time consuming for them to get it done. You know, if you guys meet once or twice a week or once or twice a month or something like that, again, the time, I'm just mentioning that there seems to be an awful lot of reference to planning and zoning of hands-on stuff that I think could basically be put, a lot of it in administrative staff assignments as part of the building permit process, as part of the process, not necessarily a control or oversee is a term I've seen. And we need to take time to create all of these conditions for all the things that are now conditional, but step back and take the time to do that. Well, thank you. I'm not sure everybody here has that kind of time to do that. I can't speak for you guys, but I appreciate your volunteering and getting things done, and it sounds like it's creating more demands on your time and slowing the process down. We have staff, and they're great, they can do it. I'm number 4.
Yes, sir.
Okay. This is basically pretty much a redo of two of these ordinances are a redo of the March 11th ordinance that was submitted by this group. Okay, March 11th, and you can compare this with the March 11th ordinance. And if you compare the village overlay with those two basically are combined in somewhat a complex and maybe convoluted way to review this one on March 11th. You just have to flip a few pages to see the difference. Again, the title of it on the March 11th one was great. This is an ordinance amending tells you exactly to allow for duplexes in the title. to allow for duplexes in commercial zones with the standard. That's what the title says in the original. You don't find that anywhere near here, okay? It's, pretty far removed, quite frankly, from what you guys submitted on March 11th, and I'm not sure why. Thing I mentioned about the survey is line 33, 34, 34, 35, 36. I sat in the meetings when Kevin was talking about duplexes and whatever. And I remember him mentioning the duplexes surprisingly are a real popular item. You know, they're higher than a lot of other things. He's right here, I smiled, but somebody else, not everybody smiled when that came up. And the author of this one wasn't smiling, because the way that is written is not positive, okay, but it tells the feelings. Whereas although public input historically showed a strong desire to limit housing to single family dwellings, new open houses and survey results suggest that some two-family houses would be acceptable. How's that for incentivize? Line 49, of course, basically it is the planning staff that has been told by the planning staff, I'm not sure who the planning staff is, I'm looking at line 49 and 50, that locations for denser housing are best identified and chosen by way of the zone, of the overlay zone. That doesn't make sense. Who's the planning staff? It's a rhetorical question, I guess, but anyway, that line, that doesn't make sense.
What line is that?
Line 49, line 50. It says that locations for denser housing, I'm not sure what that means. We're talking about a two-family house that is not very dense. Look, anyway, that's confusing, it doesn't make sense. And line 53 makes reference again to the survey. Line 55, basically it's again this idea of the height of the building. 20 feet, that's accessory buildings, 20 feet is excessive, so I think that the push is for 25 feet or something, whereas the 40 feet is allowed in the workforce. 78, 79 again, best interest is the health, safety, and welfare to adopt a new zoning overlay for construction of two-family houses. That just doesn't make sense. Sorry, it doesn't make sense. To have that overlay. Here's the one on line 92. The original one spoke to two-family dwellings. This one says 807, limited two-family dwellings, moving in a different direction. Use available only under a village overlay. Very bit different directions, line 92. Because on line 93, and this got to the first one too, what I found is the original ordinance says for approval and standards, put it as permitted and standards, not standards and procedures. And you see that little word up in there. Basically, that procedures is the planning and zoning doing administrative procedures that can be handled by the building permit people. So that little word, the following procedure and standards, the procedures jumped out at me in the first one. And I addressed it, say get rid of planning and zoning, does not have to, I'm on line 95 right now. The request for an initial use permit to the Berger planning and zoning should simply say to the town staff. It's not an overseeing thing by planning and zoning. Well, it may be, but I think you're burning yourself with too much of that. So we've discussed 99, so I'm not gonna be redundant. I'm already on file on the other ones. The only one I'll mention though is on line 103. Is it shall be permitted no more than a single culinary water connection. No water connection be more than 3/4 of an inch. Well, I called John Porter. I'd already got my approval to pay the $500 or whatever to get the water line hooked up there. And I called him to find out, because I have to run the line under a highway. We're thinking of a 2.5, anyway, what is it, 2.5 to 1 3/4, 1.5 to 3/4. Cameron knows what I'm talking about, sorry, Cameron. But the bottom line is, I asked him, what do I take to do that? He told me, he didn't even let me finish my sentence, to run one line to the duplex. He said, Tom, I think you'll be hard pressed to find the town willing to let you do a duplex with only 1 meter. And he qualified it. He said, I'm not speaking for the town. I'm not speaking for the town. He said, but I have yet to see, and this is Hurricane Valley, you know who John Porter is, right? Hurricane Valley Fire District. He said, I have yet to see a duplex that doesn't have 2 meters on it. So just an FYI, I wasn't even asking the question. Now, I say that knowing that it's very possible, and Cameron knows that too. In fact, he said he's indifferent to it. It's perfectly okay. But I think there is an argument to be made for 2 meters. Again, if you want to incentivize somebody to do something, I want to build a duplex, and they say, well, you can, but you can only have 1 meter. And it also gets to the conservation of water issue in terms of who's using the water and what are they using it for. When I signed a document with the water conservation issues, water conservation people, they basically had me sign a document that made me in perpetuity again, it's already recorded on my deed, that they can police that area and look around. I have 100% irrigation, no culinary at all for irrigation or outside, no culinary, that's what we're talking about, conservation of culinary. 2 meters gives you a better idea. If you have one family that just kind of going, you know, whatever, watering trees and all that with their culinary, you know, that's, you can monitor that, you can catch it in terms of that. I'm not selling it again because Cameron knows darn well that you can do it with 1 meter. And I'm just talking about practicality right now and consistency. And I will never argue with Cameron about something like that. There are ways that can be done with a T and a shut off, because I gave you the example of the meters here and the house is here, and if the line breaks between those 2, you have a problem. Or if one family wants to shut their house side off because they have a problem or whatever, well, there are ways to get around that. Cameron knows that. I don't, but there are ways to do that with 1 meter. It's possible to do that. But I'm thinking practicality in terms of somebody wanting to build one, monitor the water usage, or I think that's a good idea. Other than that, everything else in here, I'm not saying I'm not commenting on it, but I said I won't be redundant. I covered everything else on this in terms of limitations in my cover letter. So it's clear. My cover letter, I think it was probably in response to the March 11th one. If you want to read that again, I'm not going to go over those again. It's still too restrictive, but at least I appreciate you taking the time to listen to me. I did make one mistake on the first one, where I forgot to make reference to the last line in the on the proposed ordinance, which usually is one of those fine print things that you don't think about or pay much attention to. It's the so what it's, bear with me 1 second here. It's very important. Yeah, line 282, the repealer clause. That usually, nobody reads those last one. Line 282, I'm talking about the ordinance for the village overlay. Item A1. I forgot to mention this, I apologize. Repealer clause. All good city ordinances or resolutions or parts hereof which are in conflict herewith are hereby repealed. I'm not an attorney, but that makes it sound like this will basically repeal a lot of other things in a very quick and quiet way if this overlay goes by. Anything that's inconsistent with it is gone. That's my interpretation. I used to do this stuff for a living, but that was 40 years ago, so I'm pretty obsolete, but I thought I'd share that with you. The repealer clause may be valid in the overlay. Thank you for letting me go back to that one that you already moved forward on. I'm done. Appreciate your patience. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other comments? If not, I'll take a motion to close the public hearing and open the public meeting.
I move we close the public hearing and open the public meeting.
Can I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right. So now these are all ordinances we have previously discussed and previously had one public hearing on. And the reason we are voting on the work is because this is not its first public hearing. All right, so the first ordinance up for a vote is an ordinance prohibiting commercial or public parking in residential and agricultural zones. And if you have any new comments, since our last meeting when we discussed this, Hence, do you have anything you want to add on this one? And if you remember, this is the one where Skip Boissonneau asked, would it affect a commercial and higher resort? And the answer is no. It's just for having, paid parking lots in residential and rural residential and agricultural zones. And it is to address the concerns of some council members that, if the shuttle gains popularity, people will like parking, on people's property as a business and residential zone, and there was a desire not to do that. Remember that one?
I'd like to ask Cameron Stevens about. Would you set the previous meeting?
So I don't really have huge concerns with this, but. And I must have missed it when we talked about it in the meeting or something, because I don't remember.
This was
discussing.
based on some concerns of.
Yeah, I just don't think that this is actually doing what. A commercial parking lot, I don't even know what that means.
Parking paid.
But is that what it means?
Yeah.
It's defined somewhere? Where
Either,
would we define that?
either commercial, that would be paid because it's a business. Commercial implies a business or a public parking
So
lot.
is
Your
my,
paid or unpaid parking lots would not be allowed in rural residential and residential zones and agricultural zones.
so. If my wife has a business that she runs out of our house. And she has a public parking spot where her clients park in a residential zone,
That's not a lot.
is that now not allowed?
That would not be effective. That is not a
So-
lot.
I think that, so someone might say, well, I've got 3 parking places and I'm gonna let people park there. And you say, well, that's not a lot, they can do that now, so I think that if you actually want, I'm not opposed to stopping, I'm not supportive of paid parking in the residential zones, I'm not supportive of that, but I think if you actually want to stop that, this does not take the necessary steps to do it.
What are those steps?
You're gonna have to define these terms. You're gonna have to either define these terms or you're gonna have to put an explanation of these terms, because right now we just have 3 words that can be interpreted in many different ways. So I'm not saying I'm opposed to this, I'm not supportive of having paid parking in residential zones. I'm just saying. This doesn't take the necessary steps, that's all.
Thanks. Larry?
Well, I was probably the same train of thought, that was gonna go for this, but I guess it's true, if you're allowed to have a customer parking spot for your home business, that maybe it needs to be more clearly defined that, there's. But I didn't know you could have parking for a business in rural residential anyway, so maybe I'm a little late to the game, but,
And any home business will not have. more than a couple, any more parking that would normally be on that property. You know,
So I think I understand. What's trying to be done here. And I think that. In my mind, my simple mind, there's this. This boundary between commercial parking. And residential and business parking. The commercial parking would be where you are charged to park there. And there would be, as a business, somebody managing it and taking it and emptying the meters or taking the money. And it would have to be something approved by the town. And I think that's what we're trying to create here is an ordinance that will allow us to say, okay, if you want to do that on your lot along SR 9, that's been agricultural or zoned agricultural, then you have to go through the process of getting a permit to do that and certain building and codes and et cetera, et cetera. So I can imagine, we all have seen those kinds of lots. There's one I know of, at least in Springdale. And most businesses are going to be required to have their own parking. So this is about somebody with a vacant lot that wants to put up a parking lot. Or some space in their yard, wants to put up a parking lot. If it's going to be a listed, advertised, posted parking lot, then, which I think we have in the concept of trying to plan for what our town wants, we want our town to look like. We have to be careful that we don't allow people just putting up a sign for a day or two or even try and do anything here unless it's meeting our planning, what we want to see planned in our community. So I can understand it not being in a residential. If it's going to be in commercial or agricultural next to commercial, then I think it needs to be rezoned for parking rather than residential or agricultural. So I understand the need for this. I'm just not sure. I haven't read this detailed enough to say, are we covering all bases to keep it simple and to plan for a certain look that we want, which I think we just don't want a bunch
I'm
of
not
people putting up signs.
I'm not opposed to adding definitions.
I think that's all it needs. I think
Because,
it's
and that
simple,
could,
clear.
that could be an amendment.
Yeah,
A commercial parking lot is a designated area used for temporary parking, often on private property for a fee. So we can put that.
Yeah.
And then, public. Public parking lot is similar, but it's done through, usually the town.
Yeah,
Let me just put public parking lot. Definition.
While you're looking that up, so yeah, some definition would be good, and then. When you read down through this, what they're talking about is because we're having a shuttle system and they're wanting more stops for the shuttle system. Well, we're prohibiting this in residential, which is great. But this ordinance should have also made it either permitted or conditional in other zones so that we knew where we could put these lots, cause if you're gonna have public transit, you're gonna have public parking.
And that can be done at a later time. I mean, as we go through and update everything, I think. One of the town council meetings I was at, they wanted us to review our uses anyway. And, but I don't think it's something you just slap in commercial, because we also don't want story structures or large areas of impermeable surfaces. Or that does not fit anything that is coming out of our general plan survey, or it doesn't fit what anybody wants to see in this town, and so I think this is a pretty simple thing. I think adding a definitions, it's not a bad idea. I think that could be done with an amendment,
I don't believe so. That's a significant change.
adding a definition. Then we can add, just add, make another ordinance for the definitions. Next time now.
So you're saying, we'll add a definition to read
Just the definitions.
it, or do we go on this, or we push that out?
It's
I got-
pretty, it's
I got,
pretty,
excuse me. can I make a
oh,
comment?
sorry.
I need to. I think this is really important for the future, and I understand why we need to do this. And I have to, say that I haven't read the entire ordinance to understand that we put the detail into it to cover all the bases. And so I have to rely a lot on you three to tell me what's in there. And I apologize for that.
This
but-
one's pretty straightforward. The following uses are prohibited. And in each of the 3 zones that are affected, it is the same. Currently, they're short-term rentals, commercial parking lot, public parking lot. That's all it says.
So, what if I,
And if you're right, commercial implies business or fees, then,
They both can,
then I think we're probably okay just adding a definition, but again, that's not. So, I guess a town attorney question, or is that a? Crystal
well,
question?
we can send it forward to the town council and they will decide if it has to come back or not.
Okay. I like that.
You know, because Heath is at their meetings for sure. Okay?
So it could come back if he says it's not, if the reason of the public hearing, then it
Yes,
could come back. to
you
us,
could
but-
say, let us know for sure if that was a citizen. Thank you.
I didn't quite hear that when you turned away.
Oh, I'm sorry, Heath Snow, so we can pass this. Recommend approval, take a vote. And add the caveat of adding an amendment, and we can read those into the
Definitions.
record. With 2 definitions, and then if it is indeed to significant other change, the town council. Under the advisement of the town attorney, will just have us read it.
If I have a piece of agricultural land on SR 9,
Doesn't exist.
it doesn't exist.
No, there may be one.
I think there's one.
Yeah, the horse, chickens, yeah.
And I want to make a commercial parking lot. This is going to prohibit that without me getting a zone change going before the town council and our planning and zoning and getting a permit. Okay,
A reason.
if I have a commercial piece of property, is it the same?
No,
Can I put a parking lot on commercial?
yes,
If I have a vacant 1 acre residential lot, are there any along SR 9 or nearby within a block of SR 9? Chairman,
The answer to that, if you have a commercial one, is we don't know because it's not listed. It's not listed as a conditional use, it's not listed as a permitted use, it's not listed as a prohibited use. So the answer to that question is, can we do it on a commercial property? I don't know.
and that is not something I would just make an amendment for, because that is something we need to consider seriously, because it would have impacts. We have to although there may be a need for it, we have to be careful about how that would impact the town.
I had a friend call, says like, there's a parking lot in Springdale. And, I have someone who's looking at buying, it's for sale. There must be some really good revenues there. Especially in Springdale. I don't see that kind of pressure here yet, but, bringing the shuttle in, I don't know what's gonna happen as far as people wanting to park in Virgin, to ride into the park.
Well, I can tell you, if I want to take the shuttle in, me personally, if I want to take the shuttle, so I don't have to pay for parking in Springdale. I can't. So the shuttle is worthless to me because I have no place to park. Or else I walk a mile and a half to get there, or bike a mile and a half, and then I don't have a place to put my bike, so,
You are allowed to park in the hotel parking lot.
yeah, for now.
Yeah.
So you're saying you see pressure coming?
Well, I'm just saying that we need to have the ability to have parking if residents or tourists are going to use the shuttle system. I'm not saying we need big, huge parking lots. In fact, our ordinances don't even allow for big, huge parking lots. If you look at the commercial and the highway resort zone, there's a bunch of requirements for parking lots. And I'm not saying that they're 100% sufficient, because that's been through them for a while, but I'm just saying that if we're going to be able to use it, the shuttle system, then we're gonna have to have a parking lot. Because it's great that the hotel is letting people use it for now. But if the hotel gets full and they don't have extra parking, they're just gonna say no. I mean, they have to have parking for their guests first. I guess is what I'm saying, and they really have no reason to allow, I mean, people parking there does not bring them any revenue.
Do we have any statistics of how many people are using the shuttle?
It's pretty low, but it's still early.
I would
I
guess
asked that question.
I would guess it's mostly workers.
I happened to drive by at the right time, I saw a couple people get on, but it's still a pretty new system. So, anyway, what do we wanna do with this ordinance?
I think even though we don't have an alternative to it, I think we need to make sure that we pass this so that it doesn't become an issue with people parking up and down the street, or somebody having a $10 parking sign up in front of their house, and then people park all over the lawn, like at the Rose Bowl or something, so I'm for it. And if you think that just by adding those definitions, and if you could email those to me, I'll just read them on my motion.
Commercial,
You can just cut and paste those into the document.
Yeah.
Sure, she, I may not be able to, but sure.
Well,
And then you can refresh the document.
and line with Larry on this, that I definitely believe there's a need for us to plan for what's coming in the way of parking needs. And parking regulations, so that we can help our town continue to have that rural look that we all seek to have. So,
And I have a hard time seeing the commercial value that has in the parking lot with the cost of land here. If you figure that people can park in Springdale for as little as $10, what would you have to charge here for somebody to park here, and then have to rely on a shuttle that doesn't run every minute, it runs every 15, 20, or I think you'd have a hard time getting enough customers to justify a lot.
that would be another $10 per person.
To ride the shuttle?
Yeah,
Oh, yes,
both ways.
I don't think there's much commercial.
$5 each way. Right now. Yeah, it's the same no matter where you pick it up.
Wow.
They're gonna initiate a pass, there's a pass for locals.
There's a discount if you buy it for a month at this time. Yeah, that's it. Yeah. So,
I would like to make a motion. It's gonna be pretty, country bumpkin, I'm gonna need some help with some amendments if you need them, but I'm gonna move that we vote upon this ordinance.
With the amended definitions
Uh-huh,
that everybody's working on right now.
uh-huh.
I'm trying to do it. So
Cause that.
I wish I would have kept those earlier ones. Into parking lot or parking garages builds a facility to provide parking for rent, for lease. I don't think we need rent for lease, for a fee to the public.
And I, in my nature of wanting everybody to be happy, I would like to hear Cameron's suggestions for amendments as well.
Nah.
That's the amendment.
I don't have any suggestions.
Besides that one, okay.
All right, so for commercial parking lot, the parking lot. Commercial parking lot is a lot that provides parking. For a fee.
Is that enough? Is that defining enough to it doesn't exclude, his wife's business where they're paying
They're not paying,
the parks, they're paying for service.
yes, the other
And the
is a public parking lot. And that is the city one. Go back to that one,
You know, like motels today in some busy
Yeah,
places,
a public parking lot
a
is
separate fee for.
a designated area, often city owned or maintained. And it can be free or required fee, or. Did you find something here?
It's $1 for any shuttle.
For.
Single rides fell are $1.
Okay, so they.
A day pass is $2.50. That's on,
Sunshine? The one to Zion,
public transportation.
Zion shuttle.
It's on.
It's $5 for a one-way trip. The Zion tram bus from St. George is a special rate. Fares are $5, St. George Zion route, fares cost $5 for each one-way trip, with an unlimited monthly pass available for $100. For frequent riders, it's a really slow. I'd love it to be $1. For frequent riders, 5 days, this could reduce the cost to $250 if you bought the pass each way. But they have a special fee for that route. So public parking lot. So are we good with the commercial parking lot?
Yeah.
Is a lot, a parking lot that provides parking for you.
Yeah.
You wanna use area on parking area instead of lot, so we don't say lot twice.
Yes. And this is for Camp Not Big, if we started looking.
Okay, and a public parking lot. Is a parcel of land owned and operated by the city upon which the public is allowed to park. For a specified period of time.
Municipality, is that covered county?
Municipal parking.
Yeah.
Because we're not a
Like,
city.
no, like, but some cities have, like behind the building,
Yeah.
they'll have a public parking area,
Public parking.
like in St. George.
Yeah,
And
just
sometimes they
the-
charge for, sometimes it's free.
Right,
So is, the public parking is the parking area,
it's just the word city there, I'm trying to find a word for it.
of town.
Would it be town or?
So by municipality,
Is
is that
that,
why you suggest that?
yeah, just, does that cover it all?
Mhm.
Because a water conservancy might be considered a municipality, but they have that corner across from the bus stop. There are people are parking that now.
Yeah.
That's when people take the bus, so.
It's outfitters.
Is a parking area owned by the a municipality that is used for parking.
People that have a unintended effect of limiting that, what's the zoning in that corner?
And they'll let us know if these are good enough. And Keith may have a better one. Wants to change it.
Okay.
There may or may not be a fee. My scribbles.
And I'm gonna do this, let's see if I can do this in a different way. I'd like to make a motion. To approve. Which one is this?
Item number one.
Number one,
You want one or number one?
chapter 48 village overlay.
No. Your public meeting.
Now, Bob. An ordinance prohibiting commercial, I'd like to make a motion for
Approval.
Approval.
an ordinance prohibiting commercial or public parking in residential and agricultural zones with the following amendment. Read by, not.
That the following definitions be added to our definitions. A commercial parking lot is defined as a parking area that provides parking for a fee. And public parking lot is defined as a parking area owned by the municipality that is used for parking for a specific period of time. Period. There may or may not be a fee.
I second.
Okay, and let's do a voice vote. So let's start with this one. I think guys,
Yes.
yes,
Yes.
Yes.
the motion passes. Thank you. Or is approved, I should say. All right, second item is an ordinance amending the title 16 of the Virgin Use Code to reinstate and renumber chapter 48 open space district. And this is, we discussed this at our last meeting and, open space currently exists, but there is no code about it.
You have this one put up, Christian.
Yeah. I have it here.
So layman's terms, somebody tell me.
So currently, there's
What
open
we're
space.
trying to do.
We're putting back the language about open space into our code because we still have open space.
And open space is defined as,
Any public lands within Bergen town boundaries. It's like BLM land. It could be,
Washington County Water Conservancy.
yeah, and
What is that?
it's open space. It's limited to trails for public recreation, other public recreation facilities, utility easements, public use, essential facilities. And there's a minimum acreage.
So it is defined in that ordinance.
Yes.
Okay. Any other discussion? And we're bringing it back in, what used to be there, we're trying to bring it back in.
Yeah, it's what existed before. We're
And,
not changing
and we're
anything.
just defining this open space as,
we're just putting language in, so people know if they have open space, what is allowed.
An open space in privately owned
Yes,
or publicly.
Yeah.
An open space have, its, designation changed to,
there can be reasons.
it can be rezoned. So it's just putting it in as a type of zone.
That exists, right? We have land zones, it's not a ton, you know, but it does exist.
Okay, and we're trying to establish that for what purpose?
And we have no language about it. Every other zone has language related to it. It used to be in our code, and then it's not. So we just want to put it back in.
Okay,
So there's language about that zone.
okay. And why was it taken out?
I don't know that.
Cameron, do you remember?
Well, I don't remember it being taken out. That's never been in there that I can remember.
Well, this is what existed, so
Yeah.
it was not created. This was horrible, what was called.
So I tried to go back and find the formal version of what they're using, what they would remind me to find it, so. And I apologize, this is the first time I read it, I wasn't at the last meeting. And. Why was the biggest one, why would it then removed? If it was accidental, then, you know, just with a clerical error, it just all of a sudden disappeared, then that should be pretty easy to restate, but if it was
Yeah.
done with a purpose, I'd like to find out what that was. Maybe there was a reason they did it, we're just not seeing it.
So then if you currently have open space designation, how do you know what you can do on that land?
I guess at this point, it's only BLM land, right?
No.
Is it privately owned land?
There are some,
Cause I would hate to have a piece of property that's selling open space.
and there might be people who would want that designation. I know of at least one private property owner who would be very interested in that.
And if you own it.
I haven't talked to them about it.
Yeah, if you own it, you already have that. You can keep it open space as long as you want, but if you're the owner, but if BLM sells that land and new buyer can only do what's on there now, roads and make it look pretty, then there's not a lot of commercial value to that. But if it's on,
It
not,
can be zoned,
it can be zoned.
of course. It's another zone.
So it sounds like,
And as we talk about sensitive land areas, that would be another potential designation area.
yeah, there may be some sensitive land areas. I know Springdale has had some issues with this in the past and as the commercial housing motel businesses have expanded really quickly. There have been a few places that were historically important to the town that were open space and so I can see it. If it's just because we need to have an open space designation. Does the document there say, is it a big ordinance?
No, it's literally.
How many lines is it?
It is not 800.
You're talking lines? It's probably not very many
The
lines.
actual one ends at one, wait a minute. I
Does
just
it
wanna make
allow-
sure, I wanna make sure, and I'm glad I did that.
Does it allow me, if I own this, open space that I've not done anything on and it's not zoned anywhere? Does it allow me to go to the town and ask for a rezone?
Mhm.
Okay. Doesn't guarantee me.
Because anyone who currently has open space can do that. But if Big ELM sells some land, you know, then it would, that land would be according to this open
And
space.
that's That's going to happen in the next,
And then,
that's happening as
and
we talk.
then, I think it would give the town some options. Too.
Yeah,
Um,
so if
but,
the,
and I mean, we did some research and, there was. If, chapter 48 was floodplain, it was removed. And that's the original one. And, it's where chapter 48 used to be. Was open space. And it was closed. I don't know if it was legally closed, because this literally says, right now it's kind of hard to figure out. But it would be a moot point either way, because this is the exact same language.
do we have any, SITLA plans in boundaries?
Yes.
Do we, you know how much? One section?
I think it's a half a second.
It would be 20.
So if it's just that we're trying to. We're just trying to designate what an unspecified piece of property in the city, town boundaries is called.
It doesn't have a specific zone. It's open space. And open space requires, and this is the original ordinance, this is nothing new, this is what was in our code. And it existed at chapter 48. Can we even, I wonder if, can we at least see the date that was removed?
Yeah, click on everything and it would. Let me read the previous, or even read the
Yeah, but
ordinance
sometimes, let me
that repealed
go back and do one thing. If I go back,
it. So for me, it's something that I feel like I don't have enough information on yet to vote on, so I have to vote no. Since today, I couldn't even pull up the zoning map, so, well,
it's on that, no.
I think that it wasn't that much of an emergency, if this ain't been repealed in 2021, it's not an emergency, we can get the questions answered, and I was hoping that maybe. We could figure that out, I was hoping Cameron would know what it was.
I'd like to know a disadvantage of putting in, because these people, they don't have any ordinances about that type of land in existence in our code.
I'm sure.
How many of these people are there?
It doesn't matter if there's one or
I'm just
five.
asking how many.
There's a few.
How
I know
many?
of at least 3.
3? You know, 3,
At least three.
at least.
And the potential for more. And there might be some
Right.
advantage, to having this as
Well,
an option.
I think we need the ordinance. And, town council advice with town planning and zoning. In addition to being legislative and governing body,
Which is where,
down unless the latter administrator is in.
okay, so 2021.
Line 21,
2021 is when it was removed.
that's,
Amendment to the code was made in 2021, which perhaps erroneously removed the entire chapter.
Which concerns me, I mean, sounds like somebody's opinion, not somebody that researched it and said it was removed because of this. It's just-
Well, I know the backstory to that one. Why that language is there is because the legal removal process. There's no documentation. But the chapter's not.
So you're
So
saying
does it
it's clerical
still,
error or?
so does it still exist?
can,
I mean,
Kristen,
no,
can
if
you,
there would have been, there would have been an ordinance. for-
It is likely, but it is.
No,
so
you
here's,
just find
so
out
here's the
what
purpose.
happened.
This is
Totally updated.
this is always my passion is the purpose. To promote preserve open space in appropriate areas, keeping with the town's goals and protecting its unique landscape, views of open desert. So this is getting really environmental, you know, and the hair on the back of Cameron's neck is sticking out. And, so I wonder if it's mostly environmental or if it's to encourage only orderly integrated growth at a manageable rate appropriate with the small.
So,
And assure future connectivity, utility roads, da, 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 da. So on page one, it's putting it back in because it was erroneously taken out. We don't like why, or nobody wants to admit why. And, we're putting it back in for control, so that we can control what happens. Purpose seemed to be,
may I read you the statement?
Yeah.
of The purpose?
Yeah.
That was read at the last public hearing when you heard
Okay.
this. I think you were perhaps.
I appreciate your patience.
There are some large parcels within town limits that are zoned open space. Unfortunately, the chapter that described uses and standards for that zone was removed a few years ago, perhaps unintentionally. As a result, landowners must do deep research simply to find out what is permitted on their parcels. This ordinance returns the chapter to the Virgin's Land Use Code. It's not doing anything new.
Okay, so, all right, is there another page for this? How many pages are there?
There's three and there's this little half, well, that's really not,
It's
there's just this one, this is the last bit.
And I apologize for my slowness of understanding things sometimes. But, I want, you know, I want to hear a purpose, I want to envision where are these places, I can imagine. Spendlaws, and Allen Lee, owning areas up above the
Agricultural
town, across the river, and, other private property owners owning things that are open space, the town owns open space. That we need to have an ordinance for. So I would like to make a motion.
Yeah.
We lost him. He said he was gonna vote no anyway.
Perfect.
All that green.
Oh, the green, whoa, yeah,
The yellow.
well, that's the yellow on the north side and some on the west side, yeah. I think a lot of it's private too. Thanks. We need it, so, yeah.
Just so that people will know, dude, I don't. I'm not.
And BLM's gonna sell, BLM's gonna sell this land, I promise you, if you fight me. It's a done deal, and
This may provide a way for us to. Park.
And I think the only reason it hasn't recently is, the change of administration, you know, is changing some directions, and then the BLM has just done 11 parcels in the county that were announced yesterday, that they've sold, some seemingly for really good intention, and 50%, because they were surrounded by residential already, and, it's too much for them to manage. I would want to get out of those kinds of situations. So I'd like to make a motion now that Larry's back.
All right,
And we're on number 2, is
listen. On the bottom,
that correct?
on the bottom.
I'd like to make a motion that we, for an ordinance amending Title 16 of the Virgin Land Use Code to reinstate and renumber Chapter 48, Open Space District. Period.
Do I have a second? I'll second. Cameron?
No, not in its current form.
Larry?
And as I said before, I just don't know enough about this, or couldn't get my questions answered yet, so. I'm so going to hear him tonight, or hear, or hoping Cameron, but I had some info I was read, but, at this point, it's no.
I,
So a tie is a recommendation for denial. And it's a recommendation. And the third item is the second public hearing for amending titles. Excuse me. The last item for vote is the amending title 16 of the Virgin Municipal Code to rename it to commercial habitation to live work. And adding the definitions accordingly to expand availability of use and to amend associated standards. Any further discussion? I have none.
There is a typo that we should.
Oh.
Right, that
Yes, sir.
on line 91,
And the dates. The 22, 23, and 91.
yeah, line 91,
Yes.
where it refers to section 1625 or 26.5,
C.
D, it should be C.
And, let's double check. Correct.
are the gray, were those removals or what does the gray mean?
So it was originally a condition use, and it was described or called.
Gray has removed that section.
Yes, so that will have,
That's redacted, okay,
only if it's line through, there's some, like, there's
I
colors.
can see that.
So they've taken it, or we're taking it away from being a conditioned use to make it a permitted use. And I was thinking that we probably didn't, there's a licensing requirement now, or permit requirement now for rental of the residential portion of the unit, which I was originally opposed to. Because I thought, well, any residential unit in the town could be rented out as a, or it could be just as easily rented out as a vacation rental as any residential unit in the town, and the code already says you can. But there's probably 30 or 40 of those in our town that we either can't or aren't doing anything about, so I was okay with adding the permit process into the ordinance for just another layer of protection against vacation rentals. This is one that I started a year or more ago, and with Lee's input, mine was very simple, but maybe too simple, and she thought a lot of things that I didn't think of that we've now added in, so I think we have a hopefully a very thorough ordinance.
I. Go ahead. Cameron, you have any comments? Go ahead. I had never been in an Airbnb. But my son called me, we're off the record here, okay? He didn't call me, he called his mother on Mother's Day and said, Mom. His fiance, my fiance and I have made an Airbnb reservation at the beach, your favorite beach, for a week in October. And it's Airbnb, and you and Dad, we're inviting you to spend that week with us. So I'm going to my first Airbnb experience. Hopefully not my last. And I know we've been over this. And if anybody, I'd love to see Larry make the motion here, because I'm ready to vote.
Well, he's not going to vote.
Yeah, I
because
probably have to
directly-
abstain.
Okay, I'll make the motion.
So I have a couple things first.
Go ahead.
Okay, so that same typo that that's listed in, line 92 is also listed in line 74. Exact same typo.
Line 73.
Yeah, mine says 74, but it's there.
Yeah.
Okay,
Come on, Tom, you're still there.
And then on, so this is limitation requirements, I don't understand the need for the no building which includes livable work unit may exceed 2 stories above grade, I don't understand that requirement,
I don't either,
because we already
I just
have,
had height.
yeah, we already have a height requirement in the zone, so I don't.
And this was kind of a compromise because she said no more than 2 floors and, well, they can get it under the 22 feet, then it doesn't matter. But it was one that I was okay putting in there because it's not really a limitation, you can only go 2 stories and 22 feet anyway, so.
Yeah.
And you're still allowed to go 1 underground if you want.
And then like, in the highway resort zone, you can go 3 stories with, special permission. So I don't understand why you couldn't have a woodwork unit in one of those in the highway resort zone. Where they do allow above, so I just, that requirement doesn't make any sense to me. I feel like that we limit height and we limit stories within the zone. And we allow this ordinance to accompany whatever the zone says.
So you're saying,
So, for example, if, let's say that the hotel, the Fairfield, let's use that as an example. If the Fairfield came in and said, hey, we wanna put a live work unit in our hotel for our manager or for whoever to live on site, we would have to necessarily deny them because that building is more than 2 stories. Right?
No, the live work unit couldn't be one to us.
No, it says no building which includes a live work unit may exceed 2 stories, so no building that includes a live work unit so that would exclude any room within the Fairfield. Okay,
so
so
does the Fairfield have 3 stories?
it does,
Where's the 3rd story? That's the roof?
yeah, I guess, don't know. But they got special height requirements so they could be tall.
They're higher than.
Anyway, that's just an example. Maybe they're not 3 stories. I thought there was 3 stories and I still.
There's 2, but
But
they do have a special height.
They get it,
exception.
yes, they're higher than 25 feet.
Yeah.
So, but I'm saying, like, what is it, does it matter? Anyway, maybe that's not here or there. And then my next concern, I must have missed this last time we talked about it, is the next line in C. It says, unless specifically granted an exemption for need by the planning and zoning commission. For instance, when business requires several employees, a maximum of 1 permit per living quarters may be granted. So I don't like this because this creates almost an arbitrary standard that will be implemented by the planning and zoning commission. It doesn't state, the only requirement it states is need. So does that mean if there is a need, we have to approve it? That's almost what it's saying here.
What line is it?
C. So it's right below the no building, it's 87. So unless specifically granted an exemption for need, there should be commas there, by the planning and zoning commission. For instance, when a business requires several employees, a maximum of 1 permit for 1 living quarter may be granted for a commercial operation.
I think that language is from existing language.
I don't know if it is or not, I don't,
Annotation.
it could be, right, but that,
I agree with that language, because I think the intent was, like, I have a small business and it's gonna help my employee. Then if you have multiple employees and can prove a need,
well,
pretty straightforward.
I'm not disagreeing with that logic, I'm saying that this is not sufficiently worded to indicate anything but an arbitrary decision. And any arbitrary decision is subject to legal review.
So how would you
So if you're going to allow an exemption for more than one permit, you need to have a standard outlining those why and when you would give the exemption with a standard. There's no standard given here to allow for an exemption. My personal preference, because I don't like exemptions, would be you can have one,
Yeah.
or you can have one per acre, or you could say you could have two per acre. There should just be a standard, not an exemption to the standard.
What are your thoughts on that?
So that limitation wasn't on my original version. And Lee, and I forget how she convinced me to leave it in, but, and I think she was trying to avoid an apartment complex, and I get it. I said, but, you know, if you have a hotel, you have 30 employees and you want housing for 5, they should be able to do it. And I think this might have been a compromise, even though it may be vaguely worded, but it's a compromise. It says, okay, we're limited to 1 per business, but if you have a special need, then maybe granted an exemption.
For instance, when businesses require several employees.
Yeah, so
Find a solution.
So if you want like a quick solution to this, you would tie the number of rental units to the number of employees. 1 living quarters per 10 employees.
I think about that more.
What was that? Darlene?
She said you'd have to think about it more.
Yeah. Well, and certainly
I
maybe,
mean, because,
I'm sorry, Lee's not here, because I know she spent a lot of time on this.
well, and we've discussed it quite a bit.
Yeah.
Yeah,
We were at our
I
last meeting, we
apologize.
were kind of in agreement. It's good.
Did I not just say I apologize, I missed this line?
Did you miss what?
I missed this line. When I was reading through it, I missed this one.
So,
I missed the reference mistakes
so
too.
your solution is to say how many per employees hired, at the post?
Yeah, either do that or you just say 1.
and I don't want to limit it to just 1.
Yeah.
I think that parenthesis language
It's not, it doesn't,
gives an indication of the need. And
Is this why it says in there somewhere, Darlene or Cameron, that, come back to the planning and zoning if you want more, which doesn't make sense to me. But we ought to be able to figure out some wordage that works here or come to an agreement on what we think is appropriate.
let me give you an example of what could happen with it written the way it is. The way it's written, the only stipulation is that the business has a need and the business has several employees. So if a business comes in and says, I have 3 employees, they all live currently in Cedar City. I cannot run my business without them. I need 3 units for my 3 employees. They have presented need, and they have presented that they have several employees. By this rule, I believe that the planning and zoning would have to grant that permit.
And I'd be okay with that.
Yeah, and maybe we're fine with that, but I'm just saying,
I'm thinking if if the builder of that unit is willing to supply that much, employee housing, then I'm all for it.
but if the goal of this is to make sure that we're not creating apartments or too many workforce housing units,
Right, so what's your?
then, yeah, so what's too many, then this will not stop that.
And Lee's not here, but I would be okay removing that entirely, but that's a significant change to the ordinance, so.
And we have to remember that Utah law says that if your ordinance can be reasonably interpreted to mean something by, land, by a person who is using the land, by a person that owns the land, then that's the way it must be interpreted. And so I think that I presented a very reasonable argument that would hold up in court if it was denied.
And Larry, you would not be comfortable with putting a cap, no more than X number of word.
I actually prefer per employee number, and we can choose a number, I guess, but,
That would require another public hearing.
even if we added one per employee or one per 10 employees,
Yeah,
Yes, that would definitely require another public hearing.
you're changing the content.
If you take out the unless specifically granted the exemption part and just left it to one, that would require another public hearing too.
Agree. But you,
so our choices are to vote on it the way it is, and let the council figure it out.
Well, they would have to send it back.
they'd send it back if they,
No,
they
because
may like it.
the last one, we were able to do in the definitions, right?
Currently, it just says
Well,
one.
no, that's an easy one, because the definitions, it may come back.
Right.
Currently, it says one unless there's an exemption permitted or need.
Yeah.
An
again,
exemption permitted for a need,
And then after that, it reads for
and
instance.
that doesn't put a limit on,
But below it, it says maximum one for business.
and who did they get that exemption from?
Planning zone.
Isn't that, can't you put that in plan so that that's administered instead of coming back to the planning and zoning? That your comment about one, I would say your comment about one living space or how did you put it, Cameron?
10 employees.
10 employees.
Again, my intention is not,
I like that one because
I'm thinking that it's probably not economically feasible for somebody to build 5 units for a outfitting business or
For
a
which you
yoga
can't
studio,
charge.
or, yeah, for rent you can't charge, it's limited to specific,
Ever.
yeah. So I didn't want to limit it at all, thinking that if somebody is willing to build enough housing to house all those employees or majority of them, then I'm all for it. So my proposal would be to remove that, I am not put a limit on it. Then
I'm good with that.
come back next meeting,
Remove one item.
but remove the limitation of one per business. You know, like even a small detour business, I probably could have had 2 apartments that my employees would have rented. It.
I would have problems with that number too.
Because,
you'd have a problem
With unlimited,
if it's unlimited.
yes.
Yeah. Well,
I think economics will take care of that, I'm not gonna build 10 units for a small business. I may be build 2 for a small business, but
I
those are the most expensive part of this whole project. Is that the living quarters are gonna cost me, you know, probably 75% more than the space
yeah,
below.
this comes into that over regulating, a business, venture. When you need to have, some thought about a business isn't going to put up an apartment building for 10 people if he's only gonna have, 5 people, working for him.
Right,
And this comes down to some some of the states, efforts to eliminate control and allow more creativity and free enterprise to do its thing. So Larry, Darlene, you're suggesting that we push this down the road?
Well,
I would like to vote on it,
we could vote on it tonight.
but the
The way it is.
suggestions that are being made would require another vote.
Right. I'd rather see it get passed, obviously, but I don't wanna.
Well, I would,
And-
Some lawsuits, I
And
guess.
we have, I mean, Lee and Larry, Riker's taking a look at this, correct? There's been a lot of compromise and collaboration on this.
I say go ahead and vote on it, and I would hope that we, or maybe the town council, will come up with some ideas of how we can word the thought that we're trying to create. But I would love to see this vote on it as is. And I'll make a motion.
Do I have a second?
I can't, can
Oh, I can make a second, I'll second. And, we'll start this in this
Yeah.
time. Aye,
I? Abstain.
Kevin,
No.
the motion to approve. Passes.
Can you not vote?
Yes,
That's true.
There you go.
what?
You voted, you said yes. And
Did you
then
say
I-
yes? Oh, I didn't hear, sorry.
All right,
So I would like to make a motion, that we, bring back this exact ordinance with a public hearing, removing section C for next month, in case that, the desired changes are wanted by, town council.
This is which ordinance, one we just voted on?
Correct, with the removal of section C,
so that's an amendment.
4.C.
Which line is that?
That's the one they were just talking about.
That's the one we've just been talking about, the limit,
And you want to remove it,
yes.
and removing it does what?
Unlimited
Oh,
It does not.
limit.
So I just like the phrasing of unlimited, it removes the limit of the number of.
so we can come back and make a motion.
So this
Yes.
one's going to council and they could kick it back to us. But he's kind of preempting that by having one already on the agenda for next month. And for next meeting in case.
It's a different ordinance. It wouldn't be,
Yes.
it wouldn't be one that the town council asked for revision. It would be a different ordinance that would put, no limit on the amount of the work.
Leave it up to the business, to the owner. Instead of the
Yes,
town.
but these things also have impact on residents. That's the purpose of ordinances.
Is to be
True,
cautious.
now, we've been talking a lot about standards. And then we're removing a standard that has had a year's work, a lot of collaboration, and a lot of compromise.
It's also something that two members of this commission here presently agree with.
How so?
Both of us, sorry,
Yes.
I'm speaking this.
No, yes, I would.
Both of us agree that, I'm removing the limit or from one per business is something that would be beneficial. And as far as, I know we're talking about effects, yeah, everything has an effect on somebody next to it, and everything has an effect on the neighbor, and everything affects everything when we're talking about these things. But if you want a business to be quiet, if you want a business to be respectful of the neighbors, having someone living on the property that's there to manage that or to oversee that, or is just there to be respected helps the business be more respectful.
And
And there are several commissioners who like the inclusion of this. I didn't say that, and I think it's a good compromise.
well, what's the compromise?
That, as it is, you're limited to one unless you have a need.
Yeah, it's unless you have a need for more.
And I don't see what the problem is, because Cameron, you stated, if someone said, I have a need, this language says we have to give it to them.
The problem is we would, but the only people that would get that are someone that's rich and has money enough to fight us in the courts if it's denied.
Well,
So-
down that road.
Right, and so. Look. You're talking about compromise here, okay, let's look at this, compromise. You want one, and we want the limit to be dictated by the business, not.
It's unlimited then.
Uh,
Technically, it could be.
yes,
It
without,
could be, without the limit, there is an unlimited.
well, it would necessarily be limited by the number of employees, but, or associates of the business. But. That's the difference, okay, so you're saying the compromise is one. That's not a compromise, that's,
No, the compromise is the language as is, which allows for more than one.
on an arbitrary basis. If you want to set up rules in there that say it allows for one, except for with these exceptions, and we put out the rules and we write the rules in there, then that's a compromise. But right now, it's just arbitrary. So if whoever makes up this board decides that they dislike live work, then they will just deny them. Because they'll say, you don't really have that big of a need. And if the person asking for it does not have the resources to fight it in court, then that's where it's gonna be. So if you would like to do a compromise and you would like to list out those things, then that would be a compromise.
I disagree with your interpretation of that section,
Yeah,
because it clearly states, for instance, when businesses require 7 employees.
I have. Cameron, I understand where you're at. I do as a businessman. I understand where you're at. Is there a way to undo the motion that I made?
No.
Okay, it didn't pass, is that correct?
I still have a motion on the table
Oh, okay.
I would ask the
Since we're
chair.
arguing about this, my argument would be to,
We have a motion. I'm waiting for a second. If we get a second, we'll do a vote. If we don't get a second, the motion dies for lack of a second. Hearing no second, motion dies.
Assuming we still can't vote on that anyway, right? So
Is there a reason why you're abstaining? May I ask?
I have a piece of commercial property that I was gonna develop when I owned the Jeep Tour, that I wanted to develop when I owned the Jeep Tour business, and having, 12 guys, finding guys is a real problem because,
Okay, so you have a business that you were considering adding this as part of the business?
but I since sold the business, but the business, the new owner of the business would still like that same arrangement. He would love to live above his Jeep Tour business.
Mhm.
And I've got a piece of property that I'm proposing to do that on, so it would directly benefit me if this. I could have just applied for the conditional use and probably got it anyway, but I don't.
So you currently have a property that you're hoping to do this on, that you have proposed to do
Yes,
this on?
and I'm only gonna build one unit for the business, but, so it doesn't affect me either way, but I was trying to think of other businesses that And the reason I even thought of this is a friend of mine, I don't know if I've explained, there's a hotelier in Sedona, and they are required to supply employee housing when they apply for a building permit now. Not that long, it's a great way to get, because it's the same thing, kind of an island, there's no place close for employees to live. And the average house is 1.5 or. So, but yeah, so most of our guys are gonna have 30-40 miles to, 30-40 minutes to get here, it's pretty tough for. 3-hour shift, so. If I had a place to put them up, it would have been much easier to find good employees, so that was. The purpose that I do have.
I have one final comment,
Sure.
Madam Chair. Tom, I just want to thank you for all the study and time and the information that you gave us today. It was awesome. Thanks. I appreciate your efforts and wisdom and research.
All right, there are no other items on the agenda, so do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All in favor? The meeting has ended at